on a quiet street in a seemingly ordinary American town, where children played freely on sidewalks and neighbors exchanged polite greetings, no one could have imagined that behind one family's front door, a dark and deadly secret was brewing. Life often looks perfect from the outside, but appearances can deceive, and what unfolded inside the Coleman household was far from ordinary. It was a chilling story of control, jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately murder. A story that would shake not only a family, but also a community that thought it knew them well. Chris Coleman was a man who appeared to have it all. He had a good job, a beautiful wife named Sherry, and two young sons who lit up their world with laughter and innocence. To their friends, they seemed like the picture of a happy family, the kind you'd see smiling in Christmas cards or sitting together in church pews on Sunday mornings. Chris worked as the head of security for a world-famous televangelist, traveling often and living a lifestyle that many envied. He presented himself as a man of faith, discipline, and devotion. But beneath that carefully polished exterior, there were cracks forming, cracks that would soon split wide open. Sherry, his wife, was the opposite of Chris in many ways. She was warm, open, and full of life. People who met her instantly felt her kindness. She adored her children and poured her heart into being not just a mother, but also a supportive wife. But as time passed, friends began to notice changes. The sparkle in Sherry's eyes dimmed. The cheerful woman they once knew seemed weighed down by something heavy. She confided to some that her marriage wasn't as perfect as it looked from the outside. Chris, once attentive, had grown distant, cold, and often controlling. He dictated how things should be done, from small household matters to how Sherry presented herself in public. The warmth between them was fading, and in its place was tension that thickened by the day. While Chris told others he was committed to his faith and his family, behind closed doors he was living a double life. On his frequent trips out of town, he began a relationship with another woman, one that grew more intense with time. At first, it may have seemed like a simple affair, something he thought he could keep hidden. But secrets have a way of demanding space, and soon this secret became the center of Chris's world. He wanted to be free of his marriage, free of the responsibilities he once embraced, and free to start a new life with his mistress. Yet there was a complication: his public image, his role in the church, and the expectations of those around him. Divorce would be messy, humiliating, and career-ending. But Chris was determined, and in his mind, there was only one way out. As the weeks went on, Sherry began to sense more strongly that something was wrong. She confronted Chris about his behavior, about the distance between them, and even about the possibility of another woman. He denied it, brushed it off, or became angry, shifting the blame onto her. But Sherry was not blind. The late-night phone calls, the text messages he guarded, the lack of affection, everything pointed to betrayal. She confided in friends and family, telling them that she feared her marriage was unraveling. Some of them even suggested she consider leaving him. But leaving wasn't easy. She loved her children too much to disrupt their lives, and deep down, she still hoped Chris would change. Then came the threats. In the months leading up to the crime, Chris reported to police that his family was receiving anonymous, threatening emails. These messages claimed his job with the televangelist had put him in danger and that his wife and children were targets. At first, it sounded terrifying, a family caught in the crosshairs of someone angry at the ministry Chris worked for. The threats became more frequent and detailed, talking about harm that would come if Chris didn't quit his job. He shared these threats with colleagues and law enforcement, building the image of a man under siege, a man desperate to protect his family. But the truth was far darker. The threats weren't coming from a stranger. They were being written by Chris himself. Each email, each ominous warning, was part of a plan he carefully crafted. He wanted to build a narrative that his family was being stalked, that when something terrible eventually happened, suspicion would fall on an outside enemy, not on him. It was manipulation at its most chilling, a man fabricating danger to cover the far greater danger he posed himself. May 5th, 2009 began like any other morning, but it would end in horror. At around 6:45 a.m., police were called to the Coleman home after Chris claimed he had tried to reach his wife and children, but couldn't. He said he grew worried when they didn't answer calls or texts. Officers rushed to the house, and what they found inside was every family's worst nightmare. Sherry was discovered in her bedroom, lifeless. Her sons, just 9 and 11 years old, were found in their beds, also strangled to death. The scene was gruesome and heartbreaking. A mother and her 2 children robbed of their lives in the very place they should have been safest. Written on the walls in spray paint were angry messages, phrases like, "You have paid," and "punished." At first glance, it looked like the work of an intruder exacting revenge. But investigators quickly began to question the scene. The spray paint appeared staged, sloppy, almost too obvious. The supposed signs of a break-in didn't add up. And then, there was Chris's behavior. When informed of his family's deaths, his reaction seemed mechanical, lacking the raw grief investigators expected. Instead of collapsing under the weight of loss, Chris was oddly composed. He asked logistical questions, avoided eye contact, and appeared more concerned about appearances than about his murdered wife and children. Detectives, trained to read human behavior, took notice immediately. As evidence was gathered, the case against Chris grew stronger. The threatening emails he had reported traced back to his own laptop. The timeline of events? Inconsistent with his alibi. The financial and digital trails leading directly to him. And then came the motive, his affair. Investigators discovered explicit emails, romantic exchanges, and promises made to his mistress about a future together. He had told her that by the end of May, he would be free of his marriage. The conclusion was inescapable. Chris had planned the murders of his wife and children, staged a crime scene, and tried to cover it up with fake threats, all to pursue a new life with another woman. The trial was one of the most emotionally charged in the region's history. The courtroom was filled with family, friends, and community members who had once trusted Chris. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece, the emails, the affair, the fabricated threats, the forensic findings from the crime scene. The defense tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, that Chris was being framed, but the weight of the facts was overwhelming. Witnesses testified about Sherry's fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Her friends told the court that she had suspected Chris of cheating and had even confided that she was afraid of what he might do. The jury listened, the air in the courtroom heavy with grief and anger. After weeks of testimony, the verdict was delivered, guilty on all counts. Chris Coleman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For many, it was justice, but it was also a tragedy beyond measure. A mother and her children were gone, not because of a stranger or an enemy, but because of the man who was supposed to love and protect them. The case became a haunting reminder of how appearances can mask terrible truths. A family that looked perfect on the outside was living with tension, betrayal, and ultimately danger. A man who claimed to be guided by faith and duty was, in reality, driven by selfishness and desire. And 3 innocent lives were lost because of it. In the years since, people still speak of the Coleman family murders with sorrow and disbelief. The home where it happened has changed hands, but the memory of that night lingers. Documentaries, podcasts, and true crime shows have examined the case, each time leaving audiences shaken by the cold calculation of Chris's actions. For Sherry's family, the pain never fully healed. They had lost not only a daughter and sister, but also 2 beloved grandchildren. Their grief was compounded by the knowledge that the killer was someone they had welcomed into their lives, someone they had trusted. Yet amidst the darkness, Sherry's memory endures. Friends and family remember her laughter, her warmth, her love for her children. They speak of her strength, her devotion, and the light she brought into their lives. And though her life was cut short, her story continues to remind others of the dangers of ignoring red flags. of the importance of listening when someone says they feel unsafe, and of the reality that sometimes the greatest threats come from those closest to us. The Coleman family tragedy is not just a crime story. It is a story of betrayal, of lives stolen too soon, and of justice delivered, even if it came too late to save those who mattered most. It is a chilling lesson in the darkness that can exist behind closed doors and the devastating consequences of secrets too terrible to hide.